But mankind won't be destroyed. The fact that you and I are working here today is evidence of that. Mankind won't be destroyed. The fact that you and I are working here today is evidence of that.
to our second
do
panel
Seminário Políticas
in the
Habitacionais, Gestão
seminar
Social,
Housing
Seminário
Policies for
Internacional,
Social Rent, an
que conta
international
com o apoio da
seminar that
FAPESP, da
counts
Fundação
with the
Rosa
support of
Luxemburgo, do
FAPESP,
Observatório
the
Global de Hotéis
Rosa
Temporários.
Luxemburgo
Nós
Foundation,
estamos na segunda mesa desse
and we are in
seminário, que
our
foi,
second
né,
panel,
aberto aí pela manhã do dia de
which
hoje. Temos
began
ainda
this
a
morning,
semana inteira pela
and
frente.
we still have the
Essa
entire week
mesa vai
ahead of us.
tratar dos
This
desafios e
panel will
perspectivas
deal
da
with the
gestão
challenges and
de políticas de
perspectives for
aluguel.
the management of
Eu
rental
sou Carol
policies.
Heldt, sou
I am
pesquisadora do
Carol
LabCidade, da
Heldt. I am
FAU-USP.
a
Vou
researcher
aqui
at
rapidamente
LabCidades
apresentar
FAU-USP,
os autores e
and I
autoras
will briefly introduce the
dos
authors
artigos, né, que serão
of the
apresentados.
articles that will
Nem
be
todos vão
presented.
fazer a apresentação, mas faço
Not
questão de,
all
né, dizer
authors
o nome
will
aqui de
be
todos esses
part of the
autores.
presentations, but I
Vale
make it a point
lembrar que
to
esses
say the name of all of
artigos,
the
né, todo o
authors,
conteúdo
and we
do
should remember
seminário,
that
ele já
all of
está
the
num
seminar's
anais
content is already
preliminar,
available in the
divulgado no site
preliminary
do LabCidade.
records published in the
Então,
LabCidade's
vocês,
website.
né, buscando aí maiores informações, o
So
contato
if you want
direto com
more
esses autores,
information or
existem
direct
lá presente, inclusive nos
contact with
anais
these
constam
authors,
outros
and
trabalhos
in
que
the
não estarão
website
sendo apresentados no
you will also
seminário,
be
mas
able
que
to see
compõem
other
parte, né, do debate aqui em
works
questão,
that won't be
vale a
presented in the
pena
seminar, but
consultá-los,
that
tá?
are part of the
Nessa
debate on the
mesa,
topic.
à tarde,
And in this session, during this
temos aqui a
afternoon,
presença
we're going to
de
have the
Denise
presence of
Mesquita e
Denise
Luciana
Mesquita
Dantas,
and
coordenadora e
Luciana
assessora do trabalho
Dantas, the
social da
coordinator
SEAB,
and the advisor for
Cláudia
the
Eloy
Serabi social
e
work,
Luanda
Claudia
Vanucci.
Lloyd and
Cláudia,
Luana
consultora e editora do
Vanucci,
anuário
Claudia,
da
consultant and editor of
ALC, e
the
a Luanda,
ALC
também
publication,
consultora e
and
pesquisadora da
Luanda, also a
Unesp.
consultant and
Maria Eduarda
researcher from UNESP.
Campos, Maria
Maria
Júlia
Eduarda
Lima e Vitor
Campos,
Bahia
Maria
foram
Júlia
autores,
Lima,
né, de um
and Vitor
trabalho
Bahia, authors
a respeito da
of
parceria
a paper
público-privada
about
no centro
the
de
public
Recife.
partnership
Maria Eduarda
in
Campos, né, que
the
está na coordenação do
downtown
Promorar em
area of
Recife,
Recife,
e
the
os
city of
demais acho que são da
Recife,
equipe, né, da coordenação, acho que
and
tem
they
aqui
all
um
work
pesquisador
in the
da Universidade
coordination of the
Federal de
Housing
Pernambuco,
Secretariat of that city.
Ilana Bernardino, que é
Ilana
professora da
Bernardino,
UFPE,
a professor
e
at
o
the
último
Federal
trabalho
University
apresentado por Cláudia
of
Costa e Amanda Kovalchuk,
Pernambuco, and
também
a
escrito por
last
Fernanda
work by
Martins, Maria
Claudia
Clara
Costa and Amanda
Capobianco e
Kovakuki,
Amanda
also written by Ana Clara
Necuco.
Capobiano
São todos
and Amanda
pesquisadores, né,
Necuco.
do
They're all
FGV
researchers
Cidades.
at
Então,
FGV
teremos aqui a
Cities.
apresentação de
So we're going
casos
to
que
have
estão, né, em
presentations
diferentes
about
fases de
cases that are in
desenvolvimento, não
different
todos, né, no
phases
momento
of development,
inicial, seja já em
but
implantação, já implementado,
all of them are
ou
already
em
being
modelagem,
implemented
tanto em Recife
or being
quanto em São
modeled both
Paulo,
in
Campo
Recife
Grande,
and in São Paulo, Campo
e, né,
Grande,
uma análise que está sendo feita e uma
and an
proposta para o
analysis which is
ABC
being done and a proposal
paulista.
by for the
Será
ABC
muito
region
interessante
in
aqui o
the city of São
debate,
Paulo,
né, dos
and it's
desafios da
going to be
gestão.
very
E
interesting to
para isso
debate the
contaremos
management
com a
challenges.
professora Luciana
And for
Hoyer
that,
como
we will count with
debatedora,
Professor Luciana
professora Luciana
Hoyer
Hoyer, que
as
é
the
professora da
debater.
FAU-USP,
She is a
coordenadora do
professor at
LabLab,
the
já
University of
integrou
Architecture
equipes
in São
técnicas, né, tanto
Paulo.
na
She also was
administração
a member
pública
of
municipal
technical
quanto
teams both
federal, na Caixa
in
Econômica Federal,
municipal
na
and
Secretaria
federal public
Nacional de
administration
Programas
and in the
Urbanos do
Caixa
Ministério
Econômica
das
Federal
Cidades,
Bank
tem larga
and
experiência na
in the
política
urban
urbana,
programs
habitacional
implemented
e
by the
da
Ministry of
gestão de
Cities with
políticas
vast
públicas.
experiences
A gente vai
in
fazer
urban
então as
policies
apresentações uma
and
em
the
seguida
management
da
of public
outra.
policies.
Eu vou,
So
né,
we are
dar
going to do
uma noção de
first
tempo
the
e na
presentations,
sequência a
and
professora
then
Luciana Hoyer entra
Professor
para
Luciana
debater
Hoye
e
will
a
start the
gente
debate,
poderá,
and we will be
através do
able to,
YouTube, do chat do YouTube,
through the
vocês que estão
YouTube chat
assistindo podem fazer
where
perguntas e
you are watching,
questionamentos
you
pelo
can
chat,
ask
que aí também
questions or
traremos
make
aqui para a
comments, and
mesa,
we
para o
will bring
debate,
your questions to the
uns
debate
30 minutos aí depois do
in
debate.
the
Então,
last 30
o
minutes
evento,
of our
né, depois vai
panel.
ficar
So
gravado
the event will also be
no site
recorded
e nas redes,
on
né,
the
do
website
LabCidade para
and
todos
in the
terem acesso.
LabCidades social network so that
Vamos às
everyone can have access.
apresentações.
So let's move on to the
longas, eu estou
presentations
contando o
without
tempo,
further
tá?
ado.
Vamos seguir a
And I will
ordem
keep your
da
time. Let's
programação.
please follow the
Por
order
favor,
of the
Denise
program.
Mesquita, Luciana
Please, Denise
Dantas, podem,
Mesquita and
se
Luciana
quiserem
Dantas, you may
já se
begin.
apresentar, se for compartilhar a tela, fiquem à
If you
vontade.
want to share your screen,
Obrigada.
please feel free to
Boa
do
tarde
so.
a todos.
Thank
Meu
you.
nome é
Good
Denise
afternoon,
Mesquita.
everybody.
Eu
I am
coordeno o
Denise
trabalho social da
Mesquita. I
Secretaria de
coordinate the social
Habitação do
work of the
município de São
Housing
Paulo.
Secretariat in the
Eu estou aqui
Municipality
com
of
a
São
minha
Paulo.
colega Luciana
I am
Dantas.
here with my colleague
Eu sou
Luciana
assistente
Dantas.
social e trabalho
I'm a social
na
worker
Coordenadoria de
and I
Trabalho
work
Social da
in the
Secretaria Municipal de
coordination of
Habitação.
social work in the
Ela também fará a
Municipal Social
apresentação
Housing
junto comigo,
Secretariat.
né? E
She will
hoje
be
nós vamos
doing the
falar sobre o
presentation
Programa
with me,
Locação
and
Social.
today we're going to talk about the
Vamos
social
começar com
rent
um breve
program.
histórico, passar
We
pelos
will give a
objetivos do
brief
programa.
overview, go
Vamos
through the
falar um
goals
pouquinho
of
da
the
característica da
program. We
demanda
will talk
e do
about
trabalho social
its
desenvolvido nos
characteristics, its
empreendimentos.
demand, and
Aqui
the
a
work of those
apresentação.
involved in the enterprises.
Conseguem ver?
Can
Conseguem
you see
ver?
my presentation?
Sim, mas não tela cheia.
Yes, but if you could please set
Só um
it to
instante.
full screen.
E
Just a
agora?
second. How about now?
Sim.
Yes.
Consegue? Bom, nós vamos abordar, fazer um breve histórico,
We
né?
will
Falar
give
sobre os
a brief
objetivos do
history
programa Locação
of the
Social,
program. We will talk
como se
about
dá
the
a
objectives of
gestão,
the
a
program,
regulação
its
do programa,
management,
as
the
possibilidades de
regulation of the program,
atendimento,
the
trabalho
possibilities of
social,
service,
e
the
aí nós
social
vamos
work.
trazer os eixos
And
do
here we're
trabalho
going to talk
social,
about the
falar um pouquinho
axis
dos
of
estudos
social work,
socioeconômicos, né,
talking
que
about
nós
socioeconomic
desenvolvemos, e
studies
as
that we
atividades do
developed,
trabalho social,
and the
e por
social work
fim, os
activities,
desafios.
and lastly, the challenges.
Aqui com um breve histórico, né, o
So,
Programa Locação
a brief
Social na cidade de São
overview, the
Paulo
social
foi
rent
aprovado em
program in the city of São
2002,
Paulo was
tendo seu
approved in
primeiro
2002,
empreendimento entregue em
having its first
2004
enterprise
e o
delivered
último
in
em
2004
2019.
and the last
Então,
one
aqui
in
nós colocamos
2019.
a quantidade
So
de
here we
unidades
have the
habitacionais,
amount
o
of
nome dos
housing units,
empreendimentos e
the
o
name
ano
of the
de entrega.
enterprises, and
Parque do
the
Gato,
year they were delivered.
486 unidades,
Parque do
Olarias,
Gato,
137 unidades,
486
Vila dos
units,
Idosos,
Olaria,
145 unidades,
137, Vila dos Idosos,
Asdrubal do Nascimento, 2009,
145, Asdrubal do
40 unidades,
Nascimento,
Senador Feijó,
2009, 40
45,
units, Senador Feijó,
Palacete dos
45,
Artistas, 50 unidades e
Palacete
Mário
dos
de Andrade,
Artistas,
34
5
unidades.
units, and Mário de Andrade,
O programa ele é
34
uma
units. The
modalidade, né,
program
de
is
atendimento habitacional
a
temporário, ele é considerado
temporary
assim
housing
para a Secretaria de
modality,
Habitação.
and that's how it's considered
Então, ele é
by the
voltado para
Housing
atender
Secretariat,
demandas
and
transitórias,
it
né?
is
Ela é
meant
uma
to meet
abordagem diferente
temporary
dos demais
demands.
programas
It's a different
habitacionais do
approach
município, pelas
than
suas
the other housing
especificidades,
programs in
justamente
the
por essa
municipalities
característica.
because of this
Então,
characteristic.
nesse sentido, é fundamental
And
que a
in that
gente
sense, it is
considere as
fundamental for us to
particularidades de
consider the
cada empreendimento
specificities
e da
of
demanda que é
each
atendida
enterprise
neles,
and
né?
the
Então, cada
demand that is
pessoa ou
met
família
in each
atendida,
enterprise. So each
ela se
person
diferencia
or
a cada
family
empreendimento do programa
is
Locação Social,
different
né?
and
A demanda do Parque do
in
Gato
relation
e
to what type of
Olarias,
enterprise they'll be sent to.
elas vieram de
And the
uma
demands
foram
for Parque do
reassentadas de uma
Gato
forma
and
completamente
Olarias,
diferente
the
dos demais
population was
empreendimentos, né?
resettled
A
in a
demanda
way that was
do Parque
completely
do
different than
Gato
the
veio
other
de uma comunidade, a
enterprises. The Parque
comunidade
do Gato
Parque do
demand
Gato,
came from a
foi uma
community, the
comunidade
Parque
na
do Gato
época
community.
erradicada em
It was a community which was
2004, e
eradicated at the
já
time
o
in
empreendimento
2004,
Olarias, ele foi
and the
desenvolvido para
Olarias
atender uma
enterprise was
população que estava em
developed
situação de rua,
to
né?
meet the
Especialmente
needs of a
catadores
street
de material
of
reciclável, enfim, assim
population,
como
especially
moradores
waste pickers
também de área de risco.
and
Tem
people who work with
isso
recyclable
especialmente para isso. Como é
materials,
que é o
and
fluxo
also
de
residents
idosos
of
e pessoas
risk
com necessidades
areas
especiais?
and
Agora,
elderly
se a
and
gente
people
for
with
olhar para o
special
Palacete dos
needs.
Artistas e o Senador
But the
Feijó,
Palacete dos
Vila
Artistas
dos
and the Senador
Idosos e
Feijó,
Asdrubal do Nascimento, eles
and also
surgiram
Vila
a
dos
partir das
Idosos e Asdrubal
reivindicações
do
de entidades,
Nascimento, they
né?
all
Movimentos de
emerged based
moradia,
on the
é,
claims of
e é uma
social
demanda
movements like
que,
housing movements.
por exemplo, o caso do
And it's a
senador
demand
Feijó,
that,
ela
for
foi
example, in the case of
integralmente
Senador
voltada
Feijó,
para a unificação
it
das
was
lutas de
fully
cortiço, né? Então, o
integrated
Palacete dos
with the
Artistas também
fight
tiveram outros
of those who
movimentos
had, with the fight of those
vinculados
who
à
had
cultura,
precarious living
aos
conditions.
artistas
And
também
in
que
the Casa
desejavam
dos Artistas, which
atendimento
means
dessas famílias.
House of Artists
Então, de uma forma geral, a gente pode dizer
in
que foi uma resposta às
English,
necessidades de vários grupos
it was a
articulados da
response to the
sociedade
need
civil,
of
tanto
workers
para
in the
idosos,
art,
enfim, quanto para para pessoas também em
and
situação
culture
de rua, né?
sectors.
Então, vocês
So
percebem que é um pouquinho
these
diferente
projects met
do
the needs of
dado e
specific
do país.
parcels of
O
the
edifício Mário de
population.
Andrade também tem
And
uma
the Mário de
característica,
Andrade
né,
building also
diferenciada
has a
também, porque
different
é um projeto
characteristic
que
because it's a
ele foi
project that
vinculado a outras secretarias também no que se
was
refere à
linked to
indicação de
other
demanda.
secretariats
Então,
when it
a
came to the
gente,
demands.
vista uma população
So
formada
a
pelo
population
Comitê
made
Pop
up
Rua, né?
by the
E houve
Poppy Rua committee,
uma
and
portaria
there
intersecretarial
was
entre
an
os MADs Direitos Humanos
intersecretarial
e Secretaria de
decree
Habitação
between the Human
para
Rights
conseguir
Secretariat and the
formar a
Housing
demanda
Secretariat to
que
be
foi
able
assentada
to
nesse empreendimento.
ascertain the demand that was
Aqui os
housed
objetivos do
in this
programa, né, que é
enterprise.
ampliar as formas de
So the
acesso à
goals of the
moradia para
program,
a
which is
população de baixa
expanding forms
renda,
of access
que
to
não tem a
housing to the
possibilidade de participar
low-income
de programas de
population that does not
financiamento
have
para
the
aquisição
possibility
de
of
imóveis.
participating in financing
Aqui,
programs for
falar um
the
pouquinho da
acquiring
gestão, nós
of
temos
real
dois
estate.
órgãos, né? Um gestor
We
e
have
outro
two
operador. No caso, a Secretaria de
authorities
Habitação,
that manage the
ela
program. One is a
coordena o
management
programa,
or
atua na seleção da
authority
demanda,
that
supervisiona o trabalho
acts in the
social e
selection of the demand,
socioeducativo que é realizado
supervises
nesses
the social and
empreendimentos
social
e
educational work
também
that is
realiza
done
a
in these
avaliação da
enterprises,
situação
and
socioeconômica
also
das famílias.
evaluates the
E essa
socioeconomic situation
reavaliação ela
of the
ocorre a
families.
cada
And
dois
this
anos.
reevaluation occurs
Já a
every 2
Coab,
years.
ela é
But
responsável pela
COAB,
organização dos empreendimentos,
the
definição do
operator,
valor de
it is
subsídio,
responsible for
gestão dos
the
contratos de
enabling of the
locação,
enterprises,
elaboração
the
da prestação
value
de
of the
contas
setting the
e
value of
também
the
faz a
subsidies,
manutenção dos
providing
imóveis
accountability,
e
and also
administração
providing
dos
maintenance and
condomínios.
administration for the
Aqui eu
housing
trouxe a
units.
regulação, né, do
Here I have
programa.
the
Nós temos
regulation
a
of the
resolução do
program. We
Conselho
have
Municipal de
a
Habitação,
resolution
que
by the
aprova o Programa de
Municipal Housing
Locação
Fund
Social,
Council that approves
Instrução
the
Normativa
social
01 de
rent
2003, que
program,
define os
normative
procedimentos
instruction from
operacionais
2003
para o
that
Programa de
defines the
Locação,
operational
a
procedures
portaria
for the social
intersecretarial, que eu
rent
comentei há
program, the
pouco, né, que foi criada
intersectorial
como
decree that I just mentioned,
até
which
foi um
was
piloto, né, para
a
locação
pilot
de
decree
população que mora
for the
nas ruas.
allocation of
Então,
the
uma
street
portaria
population.
que
So there
nos deu
is
subsídio
a
para
decree
indicar
that
essa
gave
demanda,
us
né, e
the
trazendo mais outras
subsidies
duas
to
secretarias para somar com a seara, que
point
no
out
caso
that
seria Direitos
demand and
Humanos
to bring
e
together
SMATs.
other two secretariats
Também
to
tem
help
outra
us
portaria
in this work.
intersecretarial
And
de
also
3 de
another
2018 para definir a
intersecretarial
demanda
decree was issued
do
in
empreendimento Mário de
2018 to
Andrade.
define the
E, por
demand
fim, o
of
decreto
the
NEM
Mário de Andrade
282 de
enterprise.
2022, que
And
estabelece os
lastly, Decree
critérios de
61
elegibilidade
to
para indicação de
82 of
demanda.
2022, which sets the eligibility criteria.
Aqui nós temos as possibilidades de
Here we
atendimento,
have
de
the
acordo com o
possibilities
público-alvo,
of
né, e
target
prioritário.
audience,
Então, pautado
and we
no
have the
artigo
target
19 do
and
decreto
priority
61282.
publics based
Então,
on
são
Article
priorizados, esse
19 of
decreto é
Decree
de
61282, and this decree,
elegibilidade, também estabelece
it,
a
this
prioridade, né, a
eligibility
priorização. Então,
criteria also
famílias com
sets
pessoas idosas,
priority
famílias com pessoas
criteria. So
ali
families
em situação de
with
rua,
elderly individuals, families
onde,
with
né,
people
principalmente aquelas que já são
who are
assistidas
in living
pelos
in the
programas
streets, and
socioassistenciais, né,
families with
famílias com
disabilities,
pessoas com deficiência e mulheres em
and
situação de
families
violência
of
doméstica.
women
E aí nós temos
in
um outro
domestic
ponto
violence
que é
situations.
interessante
And the last
comentar,
point,
que são as
which
famílias
would be interesting
de
to
demanda
comment on,
fechada e
are the
demanda por
closed
reassentamento.
demand
Então, aqui na
families
Secretaria
and
de
the
Habitação,
families
nós
that have a
costumamos
demand
dividir
for resettling.
o
Here
atendimento
in the
habitacional em
Educational
duas
Secretariat,
categorias
we
de
have
demanda. Demanda fechada,
we
ela está
divide
voltada
housing
para
demands into
famílias que
two
foram alvos
types
de
of demand. Closed
intervenção,
demand
né, por parte do
is
poder público, tiveram
meant
as
for
suas
families
casas
that were the
removidas e aguardam
target of
atendimento
intervention by
habitacional
the public
definitivo.
power.
Já a demanda aberta é aquela demanda
And the
espontânea
open
que se
demand is
cadastra, né, vai ser
spontaneous
cadastrado lá
demand
no site do
that
Coab
registers
e ela é
in the
sorteada para a
COABI
obtenção
website,
aí de uma unidade
and
habitacional.
then they are selected to obtain a housing
E
unit.
agora nós vamos falar um pouquinho sobre o trabalho
And
social
now
em
we're going to
habitação.
talk
Eu
about the
passo a
social work
palavra
in
para
housing, and I'll pass
Luciana
the floor
Dantas.
to Luciana
Bom,
Dantas.
boa tarde a todas e
Well, good
todos.
afternoon, everybody.
Nós utilizamos, né, trouxemos aqui para vocês o conceito do
We
trabalho
brought to
social,
you the
que é
concept of social work,
o conceito utilizado pelo
which is the
Ministério
concept
das Cidades, né?
used by the
Esse trabalho
Ministry of
social nos
Cities that
programas
says
do
the
Ministério das Cidades, ele
social work in
compreende um
the
conjunto de
Ministry of
estratégias,
Cities work
processos e ações
encompasses a
realizados
set
a
of
partir de
strategies,
estudos
processes, and
diagnósticos
actions
integrados
done based on diagnosis integrated studies and participatory studies in the territory, encompassing the socioeconomic, productive, environmental, and political institutional dimension
Além das características
of
da
the territory
integração,
and the
visando
beneficiary
promover o
population,
exercício
in
da
addition
participação e a
to the
inserção
interventions
social dessas
characteristics
famílias
aiming to
e
promote the
articulação
exercise
das
of
políticas
participation and the
públicas,
social insertion
contribuindo
of
para a
these families,
melhoria da sua
in
qualidade de
articulation with
vida
other public
e para a
policies contributing
sustentabilidade
to
dos
the
bens,
improvement of their
equipamentos e
quality of
serviços
lives
implantados, né?
and the
Então,
sustainability of goods,
o trabalho
equipments, and
social aqui
implemented
na Secretaria de
services.
Habitação, né,
So the
ele
social
trabalha
work here in the Housing
regulamentado, ele é
Secretariat
pautado
is a work that is regulated
normativos. E no que se
and
refere ao
based
processo de
on
reassentamento das
decrees.
famílias, ele se
And
dá em
when it comes
várias
to the
fases, né?
resettling of
Existe
families,
o
this
que nós chamamos de
happens in several
pré-ocupação, que é todo o
phases. We
trabalho
have the
feito com as
pre-occupation,
famílias antes delas
which is
mudarem,
the
né?
entire work
E
done
o
with the families before
pós-ocupação,
they
que é todo o
move,
trabalho
and the
feito aí depois que as famílias
post-occupation, which is
mudam
the entire
para
work
os
done
empreendimentos.
after the families move to
Os
the
atendimentos
enterprises.
definitivos, né, que é quando as
The
famílias, nós
definitive,
trabalhamos com famílias que
uh,
mudam, que
because we
recebem
work with
atendimento
families that
definitivo,
receive
eles têm
definitive
um
services,
período de permanência,
they
né?
have
Então, eles
a
vão entre,
period
dependendo da
of
característica do
permanence.
empreendimento,
Depending
eles
on the
podem durar entre
characteristics
1 e
of the
2 anos. Já
enterprise,
no
they may
programa de
last
locação
between 1 to
social,
2
esse
years.
trabalho de
And in
pós-ocupação,
the
ele é
social rent
contínuo, né? Então,
program,
esse
this
acompanhamento por
post-occupation
parte da
work is
equipe social
continuous. So
dos
this
empreendimentos
monitoring
aqui
by
em
the
São
social
Paulo,
team in the enterprises
ele é
here in
contínuo.
São Paulo is continuous.
E para realizar o trabalho de pós-ocupação aqui, nós nos
And to
pautamos,
do the
né,
post-occupation
como
work
ação
here, we
social
are
também, nós nos
based
pautamos
on
nos eixos do trabalho
the
social, que
social
também é
work
definido pelo
axes
Ministério da
that are also
Cidade, né?
defined by the
Que
Ministry
são
of
os
Cities,
seguintes eixos, né?
which are the following:
Mobilização e fortalecimento social,
mobilization and
que
social
aqui é onde
strengthening,
acontece, acho que a gente pode dizer assim, um
because
dos principais
here is where we
pontos do
have one of
trabalho
the main
no locação social,
points
que é onde
of the
possibilita realizar o
social
trabalho com a
rent
rede,
work,
né? Então, todo o
that
trabalho
is the work
intersectorial
in
no
networks.
território,
So the
né?
entire
Para fomentar
intersectorial
também
work
que essas
in the
pessoas
territory to also
atendidas no
foster
programa de locação
that the
social
people
acessem as
met
demais
by the
políticas
social
públicas. As mais
housing program
participativas são
access other public policies.
saúde,
The
assistência
more
social,
participatory
direitos
ones are
humanos,
health,
né? Que
social
depois também é um
assistance,
pouco um desafio que nós
human
vamos abordar
rights,
lá na frente.
and that's also a challenge
Outro
that we're
eixo
going to
também
mention
é o
up
acompanhamento
ahead.
e gestão
And
social
another axis
do
is the
empreendimento,
monitoring and
né?
social
E nesse
management
aqui as
of the
atividades eles
enterprise.
são
And
atividades
here the activities are
de cunho sim, até permanentes, mas para também
permanent,
contribuir para que essa
permanent, but they
população se
also
sinta mais
contribute
pertencente àquele
for the population
empreendimento,
to
àquele
feel a sense of
território, né? São
belonging
atividades nesse
with that
sentido. O
enterprise,
eixo de
with the
educação ambiental e
territory. The
patrimonial, ele trata de
environmental and
questões de
patrimonial education
preservação do
deals with
empreendimento, do
preservation of
espaço,
the
do local,
enterprise,
né?
of the
Então, são
space,
atividades
of the
nesse
place. So
sentido que são
these are
desenvolvidas.
activities that
Já o
are
desenvolvimento
developed.
socioeconômico
And
são,
the socioeconomic
são
development
as oficinas de geração de renda, que nós
are
temos um
the
exemplo
income generation
da Vila dos
workshops.
Idosos, daqui a pouco nós
And we
vamos
have an
mostrar que
example of
foi
the
pessoas que
elderly
vieram da vila, né?
village.
Que hoje são artesãs, cadastradas e tudo mais. A gestão
We
condominial,
have
no
women
caso da
who are
locação
currently
social,
workers
é
that work
formado
with
por grupo
arts and
gestor, né? Porque
crafts.
a
And
locação social não tem síndico, não tem corpo diretivo, já que
we, and to
sabe que
manage
essa é
the
a quatro.
enterprise, we have management
Então, tem, na verdade, grupo
groups
gestor que é formado no condomínio.
that are formed in these
Outra ação
another
desenvolvida no trabalho...
action.
Desculpa. Deu 12
Sorry,
minutos,
Pois não.
tá?
the 12 minutes
2
are up.
minutos?
Deu 12
Ah, tá bom.
minutos. Então,
No,
se quiser
your
encerrar,
12 minutes
fiquem à
are up.
Então,
So
vontade.
if you could please conclude.
nós já vamos
Oh,
para
that's
encerrar
fine.
tudo, então, só mostrando.
So let's jump to the conclusion
Aqui são
just a
algumas das
second.
atividades,
These are
né,
some of the
desenvolvidas pelo
activities
trabalho social,
developed by the social
nos
work
empreendimentos do
in
programa, né,
the
que é o programa social,
enterprises
as
of the
atividades
program and the
socioeducativas, visitas
activities,
domiciliares, aqui
social
um exemplo
educational activities, house
das
visits,
costureiras da vila, que
and
é
these are the
trabalho e renda,
examples,
e aqui alguns
including
desafios,
of the
não só do
village
trabalho social,
seamstresses.
né,
And
de
here's
uma
some
forma
challenges,
geral, de
not
uma forma
only
geral,
of
e
social work, but
no
in
debate a gente
general.
conversa mais sobre eles, sobre os desafios.
And in the debate, we can
Muito
talk
obrigada.
more about the challenges. Thank you very much.
Tá ótimo.
Great.
Só um minuto. Aqui.
Carol, você caiu, será?
Carol, are you there? I think she was disconnected, so I will call our next panelist.
Somos nós as próximas?
I think we are next.
Aqui o programa. Luanda, você talvez esteja com ele mais fácil do que eu.
Yeah. Luanda, you have the
Achei.
program open. Found it. Here it
Vamos
is.
chamar então Pilares da
Let's
qualidade de vida,
call
de locação social,
for the pillars of setting up a social
reflexões
rental
acerca da experiência de
program,
Campo Grande,
reflections
Cláudia
based on the
Magalhães
Campo
Eloy e Luanda
Grande
Vanucci.
experience. Carlos Magalhães Eloy and Luanda
Bom, vou só compartilhar aqui a minha tela.
Vanucci. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen with all of you.
Obrigada, Luanda.
Thank you,
Estou
Luanda.
vendo uma chuva aqui, deve estar em cima da casa da Carol nesse momento.
I see that it's raining at my window. It's probably raining at Carol's house.
Gente, só um minuto. A gente treina, mas na hora sempre tem alguma coisa que dá errado.
We practice, but when it comes the time, there's
WhatsApp.
always something that goes wrong.
Acho que foi aqui.
Tá indo.
Yeah, there. I think I made it.
Vendo?
Do you see it?
Já chegou.
Yes. Oh, and there is Carol.
Gente,
She's
boa
back.
tarde, todo
Okay,
mundo.
good
Eu sou
afternoon,
Luanda,
everyone.
sou
I'm
geógrafa,
Luanda.
vou
I am a
planejar no
geographer
FAU-USP.
and I
Vou
work in the
fazer com a
planning
Cláudia
sector in the
Magalhães,
USP.
arquiteta, também
I'm
doutora
going
pela
to
FAU-USP.
make my
Ela foi
presentation with
debatedora
Claudia
no café da
Magalhães.
manhã.
She's an architect
Em
from USP. She
2021,
was in the
nós
morning
os
panel as
dois
well. In
trabalhamos juntos
2021,
numa consultoria
both of
que
us, we
trabalha
worked
pelo
together
MED,
at a
que é o Banco
consultancy
Americano de
for the
Desenvolvimento.
Inter-American
Nós apoiamos o
Development
município
Bank.
de Campo
We
Grande
supported the
na
Campo Grande
modelagem do
municipality
programa de
in
locação
Mato
social
Grosso do
para um
Sul
parque
in
habitacional
their
privado.
social
Essa modelagem
rental
deu origem
project and in
a um
modeling
decreto
it.
que
And this
regulamentou o
modeling
sistema
led to
social do
legislation
município, que foi
to
implementado
regulate it, and it
posso
was
utilizar
implemented,
desde
and it's being
2022.
operated since
Então, hoje a
2022.
gente vai
And
apresentar.
today we
Eu
will
vou começar apresentando
make the
brevemente o histórico e as
presentation about
características
the
do programa de
history and the
locação e
general
alguns números.
characteristics with
Na
some
sequência, a Cláudia vai
figures.
falar de alguns
And then
aprendizados e
Claudia will
conclusões
talk about some
importantes desse
lessons
processo que a
learned
gente acredita que vai fomentar um
from
debate
this
mais relevante
project that
sobre a
can
locação
help
social,
other
tanto na
projects
universidade
in
quanto para gestores
rental,
municipais
in
interessados
social
em
rental, and
empresas
be it in
profissionais nesse
universities or
futuro.
and other
Na nossa
professionals.
fala.
So this is
Sobre Campo
our
Grande, o
agenda. About
município,
Campo Grande,
ele
first of
aprova em
all, it's
2021 uma lei
a
municipal
municipality
que
that
institui o
in
Programa Locação e Locação
2021
Social,
approved a
mas que
municipal
ainda
law
precisaria ser modelado
instituting
e
the
regulamentado.
social rent
Então, a gente
program, but it
queria
still needs to be
desenvolver um
regulated.
trabalho conjunto
So
nosso com
this
diferentes
is our joint
secretarias, mas
work with
principalmente com
several
a Agência Municipal de
secretaries and departments,
Habitação e
but
Assuntos
especially with the
Urbanos,
education and
a MASH, que
land
hoje em dia chama
uh,
EMA, que vai
issues
tocar o
of the
programa.
municipality.
É um
It's
trabalho
called
conjunto para a gente
MHA.
desenhar, então, um modelo de
And
programa que
we
vai
will
ser
design a
muito
model for the program
especificamente para um
that
programa em parque
will
privado de habitação. Então,
specifically
a
be
EMA,
a
ela
private
tinha uma
park
receita específica, um orçamento
for people
próprio,
to live in. And it has a
que
special
hoje
and
em dia está em
specific
torno de
budget
R$ 100 por mês, na
that
época era
nowadays
100,
it's in
hoje é
100,000
50 mil. Então,
reais
eles tinham
per
interesse em
month.
colocar de pé um
And
programa que
there
pudesse ser
was an
implementado
interest
imediatamente
to
com
have a
recurso
program that could be
possível,
immediately
alocado pelo
implemented
privado, que
and
seria gerido
subsidized
pela
and
própria
financed
EMA em
privately
parceria
to be
com
managed
o
with the
privado.
EMHA together
Então,
with some
o
real estate
desenho que a gente
agencies.
trouxe foi
The
o
design
programa
that we
oferece um
achieved was
subsídio, um
this.
voucher
We
de
have a subsidy or
complementação,
a
que é um
voucher
valor
to
que é pago para as famílias
complement
locatárias de
the
imóveis no mercado
families
de
for
locação
them to
privado
rent
padrão.
the real
O
estate and
voucher,
properties
então,
that
ele
is standard in the
interessa
market.
entre o valor do aluguel e a
So it
capacidade de pagamento
complements
das
the rent
famílias.
value to be
Hoje
paid
o
and what
valor
is going to be
máximo
paid by the
pago de
families.
subsídio
Today
é
the
de
cap is
R$ 600, no começo do
600
programa era
reais.
500.
It used
O
to be
público-alvo
500
do
in
programa foi
2022.
definido
The
para famílias
target
com renda
audience
entre
is
3
families
salários
with
mínimos, mas
an
admitindo-se a
income of
possibilidade de
between one and
desalas
three
famílias
minimum
com renda
wages.
até 5 salários mínimos,
But we
desde que a
have
renda per capita
exceptions
não exceda um salário mínimo. Então,
since
existe uma avaliação
with
dessa
a few
faixa de
limitations
pagamento para a
for
renda
the
per
per
capita.
capita
A
income.
família precisa ter alguma capacidade de
The
pagamento
family
que
needs to have
passe de um
some
salário mínimo,
capacity
A
to
renda zero não
pay.
está incluída nesse
So
programa.
those that have
E tem um
zero income
limite
are
de
not
comprometimentos de
contemplated in the
renda
program.
familiar de
And
máximo
of course, there is this
25%
commitment
para famílias
of a
com
limit of up
pagamento
to
disso, e precisa de
25% of the
justamente qual que vai
family
ser esse
income.
pagamento que vai impedir
So
que aquela
the
família locatária
program is
entre no que os cálculos de
to
déficit habitacional chamam de valor
enable the
definitivo
families
com
to
aluguel. Foi
to
definido um
live,
valor máximo de
and
locação no início do
there's
programa
this
de R$ 1.000, que hoje
maximum
está em
value for the
1.500.
rent that is
Esse valor ele é
today in
baseado no
1,200
levantamento
reais,
dos valores
and
existentes
that
no
is
mercado de locação
based on
local. Esse valor
market
varia de
values,
acordo com a
and it
macrozona
varies
do Plano
according to
Diretor de
the macro
Desenvolvimento Urbano do
zones and
município. Então,
the
admite-se o
urban
teto somente
development
nas áreas
plan.
centrais, mas não nas franjas
So
urbanas.
usually it's
O
more
contrato de
for the
locação
central and
prevê
urban
uma
areas.
relação entre
We have
que é mediado pela
a,
imobiliária
a
e
standard
que a ENTRE, a Autoridade
contract
Municipal, entra como
in which the
testemunha
ENTRE, the
e
agency, the
oferece
municipal
ainda
agency,
uma
is a
garantia em
is
caso de
a
inadimplência de que
the
seguirá
is a
pagando até
testimony
3 parcelas da sua parte da
and
prestação.
guarantees the
A
payment
gente
of at
trouxe o
least
diretor do programa
3
ontem, ele disse que
installments
até agora
of
são
the
zero casos
subsidy.
de inadimplência.
But
O programa
until
também
today,
promete fazer
there
atendimento a
had been
mulheres
no
vítimas de violência
cases
doméstica,
of
idosos e pessoas com
default.
deficiência.
And usually, well, the
Então,
priority groups are women that suffer
criando
with
um mecanismo
domestic
para
violence, the
esse
elderly, and people with
aplicativo, uma espécie de
disabilities.
cartão, porque hoje em dia
They
é
receive
pegar a
a
EMA que
kind
paga
of
diretamente para
credit
visita
card
da
that is
imobiliária.
paid by EMRA directly
Eu não vou me
to the
demorar
real
muito aqui,
estate
mas já entrando no
agency.
debate, na apresentação do que a
Now,
gente chama de
talking
pilares de um programa de
about
locação
the pillars
social,
that
acho que cabe
make up
trazer
the
esse
title of
debate,
our
né, que é o papel da
presentation,
cultura
the
da casa
debate
própria versus
uh,
valorização no Brasil.
goes around the
Ela ainda
culture
é
of
predominante
ownership
e que tem
versus
dominado
rental,
tanto
which
a produção, as
dominates
políticas públicas,
the
o fluxo
all public
habitacional e as
policies
demandas
and
por bens
educational
moradia,
policies,
né?
and
Então,
also
o
the
resíduo
demand
como produto
for
imobiliário, que é o produto
housing
definitivo.
and in
Isso leva
the
em
real
consideração que uma
estate
parte
industry
muito
doesn't
significativa do parque
consider that
habitacional no Brasil são de
the
famílias que não
the
têm
housing
recursos, que
deficit
são
in Brazil is made up
capitais
of
para
people
o
that are not
financiamento
able to
habitacional,
pay for
mas que isso parece algo que está
home
avançando, a gente está
ownership.
acompanhando uma
And
tendência de
so
crescimento
there is a trend
da
that we are
participação da
following
locação, cada
that
vez
is
mais
growing in the
empresas
participation of social
e
rental,
também o
and
setor público
more and more the
entrando
public
mais
sector
nesse
and the private
mercado. Então
sector
agora eu vou
are
passar para a
more
Cláudia,
interested in this market. Now I will pass the floor to Claudia,
sobre
who
os
will
próximos
talk
pontos.
about our next
Obrigada,
topics.
Luanda. Boa tarde para
Thank you,
todo mundo. Vamos
Luanda. Good
continuar.
afternoon, everyone.
A gente fez, para fazer essa
For
modelagem, a
for
gente
this
fez uma distinção
modeling, we had to make
entre o
a
que seria esse
differentiation
programa
between
de
what
locação
this
social e outras
social rental
modalidades
program
baseadas no aluguel.
and
Então,
other
a
modalities based
distinção
on rental.
em relação
And
a,
the
por exemplo, ao
differential
auxílio aluguel,
is
a
that
bolsa aluguel, a
when
bolsa
we have
moradia, que ajuda
the
quem tem
rental
dificuldade,
assistance
no
and
caso, o
the
programa
housing
transfere
first
de
are
renda,
programs
porque programas
of
habitacionais,
of resource
ainda que
transfer and not housing
exista, né,
programs,
e
even though
seja
they
carimbado por um
they
programa de
are sealed
pagamento
as
do
programs to
aluguel,
pay
mas
rent
o mote é
and
um
housing,
pagamento
but
emergencial.
their essence
E a
is
gente
of an
entende também que tem uma
emergency
distinção
payment.
em
And
relação ao
also
Housing First, ou moradia
there's a
primeiro,
difference
moradia
between the
assistida,
housing
que são
first
programas voltados para a
and
população de
moradia
baixa
assistida, which are
renda, que
programs that
tem
are
como
directed towards
mote a partilha
the
do apoio, o
street people,
acolhimento
the
e o
homeless people
social.
that live on the street,
E,
and they are
e, e por que
more
essa
assistential.
distinção?
And why
Porque
do
a
we do
gente
this
entende que nesse
differentiation?
segundo
We
caso, a gente está
understand that in this
falando
second case, we're talking
de
about
iniciativas que transcendem
initiatives
a
that
dimensão da
go
moradia
beyond
numa política habitacional
a
e
housing
clama por
policy,
uma abordagem muito mais
and they
integrada,
have a more
mais
that which need a
interdisciplinar,
more
né? Então,
interdisciplinary and
a
integrated
outra questão é que
approach.
segmentos
The
de
other issue is
vulnerabilidade,
that
com capacidade
vulnerable
de pagamento
segments of the
muito
population with a
alta,
very low payment
esse é outro
capability or
ponto,
even
né? Quer
inexistent
dizer, quando a gente fala quais são os
capability. And this is
critérios que um
the
programa
issue.
utiliza.
What are the
Quando um
criteria
programa
used by the
utiliza
programs? When
critérios
the program uses
estritamente
criteria that are
sociais e
strictly
ele não olha para a
social
capacidade econômica e
indicators, and they do
família,
not, and it does not
a gente
observe
pode ter o
the
problema da
payment
família
capacity
não
of
ter
that
capacidade de
family,
arcar com aquela
we
renda.
might end up with
Principalmente quando a
problems that
gente
they are not
trabalha
able
com
to pay.
faixas de
And when
renda,
we
com
talk about
faixas de comprometimento, sem
income
olhar
brackets and
a renda per
income and
capita,
compromise brackets
isso
and
costuma
the
mascarar
per
a
capita income, it
capacidade
usually
efetiva de
covers
pagamento da
up
família.
the
E aí, ou o
effective
subsídio
payment
vai
capacity of that
substituir
family, and
a
then the
capacidade que
subsidy will
existe, né, que o
replace the
subsídio está sendo dado em
existing
excesso,
payment
ou o
capacity because
subsídio
it
ele vai
exceeds
ser
that amount,
insuficiente,
or it will be
porque na verdade
insufficient
aquela família não tem
because
capacidade de
in reality
pagamento,
that
sempre
family
lembrando que
does
além
not
do que
have
se
payment
cobra,
capacity,
né,
and we
como
must remember that
participação no
in
aluguel,
addition
a
to what
família
is
vai ter
charged
que arcar
in rent,
com
the
os
family
custos
must
de
also
morar e
pay
agora,
the costs of living, the
digamos assim,
utilities and
sendo esses
other
custos
costs.
todos formais,
And
né?
and they are all
Energia,
formal costs like
água,
energy, water,
enfim, e às
um,
vezes taxa de condomínio.
and sometimes
Então,
the condominium
essa que seria a
services.
distinção
And that
principal.
is
Nesse caso, a
the
gente está
main
olhando de
difference.
fato
So in
para a
this case, we
capacidade de
are
pagamento, a gente tem um
actually
critério
looking for the
econômico
payment capability, and we have this economic indicator for eligibility to the program. And like in the case of Campo Grande, there's a minimum income to be to access the program. So our sense is that the payment capacity of the family must exist, and it must be assessed within the family unit. So it's not a bracket or a range. It's the family unit and the per capita income, and it's parameterized by social and economic indicators. The subsidies will complement the payment capacity, and it enters in this niche part for the excess amount of rental that must be paid. It also, it doesn't replace the whole payment so that we will not lose that subsidy. Well, I already mentioned the per capita, so we can advance, please. And then we also have this difference regarding the rent aid, in which the family must decide in which property they are going to live in, but not in this case. In this case, all the property, the real estate is also considered, and that is how we calibrate the value of the subsidy and the concern with the best urban insertion. The contribution for the urban advancement and to better use areas and infrastructures and the city's equipment. Also, the parameters that are related to the localization of real estate with the consolidated urban areas, installed equipment, price limits, subsidies, all of this is considered within that microregion. And also alignment with the director plan and other urban design plans. When we began the process, Campo Grande was carrying out its design project, and that also helps us see where there are flexibilizations and promote the accessible rent. Usually, when you structure the program, we usually find a rental market that an accessible market that is below the needs and usually below the demand and even the municipal budget, and unable to scale up. And also the project favors the relationship between the localization, the placement, and the productive activities of the family. So we make that match and make the compatibility between the family's activities and their productive and income activities and the place where they live. It also favors the compatibilization of the number of rooms and the size of the family. The property also follows eligibility indicators. There's an assessment and done by an engineer and an architect, and when necessary, also the civil services, civil defense. So not every property is eligible. It must be safe. We also have the capacity of immediate service and the setting of the real estate bank could be by indication by owners and real estate agency or by the families themselves. We have cases in which the family is already living in a property and she's happy there, but she needs the complementation to be able to pay the rent that is usually high in regards to their income. So our final remarks, this is a voucher that expands the effective demand, but without an offer, an expansion of the offer, there might be market distortions reflecting on increasing prices. So we must be very aware of this situation, and for that it is important to have the reference in prices within the city and monitor that. We also have strategies for the development of an accessible, affordable rental market, require articulation and several other incentives like funding and financing, urban instruments on the municipal level as well. And there's always a risk of capture of the program by client list objectives, and that is also something we must be aware too, so that we not end up deviating from the program's pillars. So it's a very important challenge to promote the affordable access to rents without speculative movement and compromising the access by people and elevating subsidies and hindering the expansion of our service and scaling up the families served. That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Claudia. It's very good to be able to discuss and compare experiences and cases, and the proposal to compare with the São Paulo project and now also this one in Recife. I'm going to ask now Maria Eduarda Campos, representing Maria Júlia Lima, in this presentation about the public-private partnership for social rental in Recife. Good afternoon. I'm Maria Eduarda Campos. I'm an urban architect, and together with my colleagues, we've come here to present this project about social rent in Recife. We work together at the Promoveram, which is part of the municipality of Recife, and we are working in this coordination of risks and housing policies. And one of the projects that we are presenting is a pilot project, and which I worked. And in 2021 to 2023, I've also been the Secretary of Housing in Recife. And before that, I worked with the government of the state in the same things.
So I'll begin my presentation with this image here of the city of Recife. Let me just see if it's working. So first, I bring the general map of the city to show that Recife is an 100% urban city. We have a very high demographic density of over 6,000 inhabitants per square kilometers. So we are among the 5 denser cities in the country. And from the city center up until the limits of the city, we have about 10 kilometers. So we're gonna also talk about the islands that are in the east part of our city. We're going to give you further detail. So to talk about Recife, we have some images. This is the Boa Viagem beach, which is the most well-known beach in the city, to show this verticalization and this density of the population. But we also have many mountains where 30% of our population lives. This is also the city center that shows the social inequality, which is very high in our city. We're combating it, but we have these mixtures of families living in slums. And even though in the last 4 years we had housing programs to resettle over 1,000 families, we still have a lot of inequality in the municipality. Meanwhile, we have new private enterprises in the city center. So this is a new hotel that was just inaugurated with a marina and a new convention center. So this idea that we need to renovate the center with public and private investment, and this is an older image of the Guararapes Avenue, which was the first avenue in the city to be vertical. So Recife, it is the oldest capital in Brazil, and we are just about to turn 500 years of age. And this is the first verticalized avenue in the country. And this is also an image of the center showing the density of the population, and in the back, the mountains in the city, close to our borders. A couple of habitational data, we have the excessive use of rent, totaling 75% of the deficit in the city. And in 2022, it was also presented that unoccupied households represent 77,000, 30,000 of which are houses, and the rest are apartments. And this is very important when talking about social housing. And in the building of the housing policy ever since 2005, and more recently, the entire debate that was done in the municipal conferences of the city, in 2021, we instituted a municipal housing plan and also a new director plan or master plan for the city, and the local social rent program. And this local plan had targets every 4 years. And then in 2022, we created the Bom de Morar program, and in the same year, it was regulated by a decree, which is our social rent program. And also in the end of the year, we created the Pra Morar program, which is the one we're working with right now, which is a program for urban resilience in vulnerable areas. And we're going to talk about the axis of our housing policy. We always worked very strongly with subsidied and financed production, urbanization, land regularization, and housing improvements, and also the needs for institutional development in the municipal housing policy. And in 2021, we inaugurated the social rent axis. And we decided to follow two paths. In the Bom de Morar program, we have a private park with a voucher policy, which is very similar to the program that was just presented by Claudia and Luana in Campo Grande. And we also have a second axis for a public rental park, a very daring activity through a public-private partnership. So ever since 2021, we started structuring both parks, and they are being implemented in parallel. And this is the only slide I'll present about the private park. Last month, we hired a manager for the program, and the main difference is that instead of doing this with our own team, we hired a manager to monitor, supervise, and do the technical and social monitoring in order to provide real estate services, which is a new thing for the public power to hire, and the target is 1,200 families in 4 years. So it's very daring for a city that's just beginning, but we also set that target for the manager, and we will register and manage the real estate bank. We will do social management and provide support to the families, and we will manage the rental contracts and do the financial management of the program. And now we go into the public-private partnership, which is the concession to provide, manage, and maintain enterprises, housing enterprises in the center of the city. And this is a concession for 25 years. And we thought about this PPP as a structuring component for the rehabilitation of the center of Recife, the preservation of the historic and cultural heritage associated to the economic, social, and environmental field. Because we already have public transportation implemented in the city center, we have an entire network of services and cultural activities. So the only thing we need is more people living in the city center, and also bringing public-private partnerships without it only being in theory. We will implement this in an advantageous manner for the public and private spheres. Also, always remembering social mobility and housing as a right to access to the city and something that makes it easier to access other public services. So the premises is we're focusing on social rental as a housing service within a PPP that is essentially the provision of a service It may include construction or not, but throughout 25 years will be the provision of a housing service that will be provided. And in the project, there will be the management of the rental of real estate, social work, and which was really defended here in São Paulo and that we see as essential. So during the entire period of the contract, everyone will have that support, and also building maintenance, which is a challenge for the public power. And in the beginning of the service provision, we do the payment of the local government installment to the private partner. So the risk for this initial phase is 100% borne by the private partner. So this sharing of risks is very important in a PPP. And there's also a coincidence because in 2021 is when the PPP program started. And at that moment, we had a ceiling of 5% of the net worth of the municipalities to be invested in PPPs. So we saw this as a source of resources and priority that could be used in a housing program within a PPP structure. And we also had a strong partnership with the federal government, both in the donation of public properties. We had several buildings that were not being used, public buildings, that started composing the public housing park. And we also counted with resources to study the PPP. So some images from the projects. Here on the right side, we have the Recife Island. On the left side, the Antônio Vaz Island. And we have enterprises in 4 neighborhoods in the city center. The potential of housing production is 1,128 units, out of which 637 compose a public park for rental and are public owned properties, and this is emphasized during the entire contract, 25 years, and we will also alienate over 400 units in the program. And here emphasize thinking about social housing for families of several sizes. So we have units of 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms for more numerous families. The first project is the one that was first part of the PPP, a well-known building that we call Pátio 304, and it's a public-owned building, and it is defined as part of the PPP, and in its ground floor, we designate third of its area to install a municipal daycare. There's no municipal daycare in this neighborhood, and we saw that the cross-cutting aspect of public policies that we want to guarantee, we have been attempting to bring. The second building is Siqueira Campus, an unfinished building of 14 floors, the only private-owned building that has a considerable level of depth, and we added it because it's time to do a project and a construction to requalify the building that is very much abandoned and unsafe in a high value area. So that's why we inserted it in the PPP program. And this is the surrounding area and also the site of the building, from the building. Another building that used to be owned by the federal government that was donated to the city hall is in the Dantas Barreto Avenue. We have the building and the land and its transformation with a retrofit and a new building taking advantage of the existing building. So it is a building that is being developed in the São José neighborhood in the city center. And these are the surrounding areas. We're talking about São Pedro Parque, the subway station. Another building is a city hall land in front of the BRT station in the corner in Riachuelo and Saudade neighborhood, which will have studio apartments, and these are the surroundings where it's located. And lastly, in the Cabanga neighborhood, and we're talking about neighborhoods here, so we have this land that was donated to the federal government to the Recife City Hall, and it represents 6% of the entire neighborhood, and this is a neighborhood with a very low demographic density of 19 inhabitants per hectare. And we present here the surrounding areas, and this neighborhood has a huge land that's owned by the Army. We have a yacht club We have 500 houses, but we will double the population of the neighborhood. So the urbanistic importance of this, once again, guaranteeing a daycare, a social housing, and also building a music school. Actually, we already have a music school in the neighborhood, the citizen orchestra, that there are children in the neighborhood that study there, and children from a neighboring neighborhood, and public green areas, also renovating parks and squares associated to the development of the neighborhood. I'm sorry, if you could please conclude. That's almost my last slide. So we have a limited verticalization and the amount of natural land that and the preservation of existing trees that we need to respect. And with that, I close my presentation. I'd like to thank everybody. And this is an image of the Santo Antonio neighborhood, a neighborhood where we need to invest in, we need to renovate many abandoned buildings, and we can do that through the PPP. Thank you. Thank you, Maria Eduarda. And we will now continue the debate about these programs and projects in Recife with Ilana Bernardino. She is a professor at UFPE, and she has a more contextual view on the debate. And Ilana, take it away. The floor is yours.
Vocês estão visualizando a
Can you
apresentação em tela
see my
cheia?
presentation in full screen?
Agora sim.
Yes, now we can.
Gente, boa tarde.
Great. So, good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here in this event, being able to debate with you. I'd like to acknowledge my fellow panelists, and I'm very happy to have been preceded by Maria Eduarda. There are some aspects that I won't even need to present because she did that very well about the city of Recife. I am an architect, and I'm part of the graduate program in urban development and the study group about the land market. We have been studying the real estate market for 12 years in the historic center and its surroundings. I'm a part of the faculty of professors in the architecture and urbanism course in the Federal University of Pernambuco. And I would like to contextualize our debate by talking about the growing participation of rental properties, even with the Minha Casa Minha Vida project, promoting the decrease in housing deficit when it comes to cohabitation and the precariousness of houses. We still have a housing deficit that is attributed to the excessive burden of rent that is growing. And I quote Pedro Abrama that said that the rental real estate market is still the entrance door of poor people into the city, and it's very important for us to understand this rental real estate market for the low income populations. And having said that, I like to highlight that Recife, even though the previous presentation already mentioned this, we have islands, peninsulas, mangrove areas. So when we exclude all of the areas that, due to geomorphologic conditions, are not apt for housing, we have a very diminished territory. So the price of land in the city of Recife is very high, which causes each piece of land to be very precious to us. We need to be very dedicated to mapping that land and understand where we can set up social housing. And the most recent data, most recent updated data about the housing deficit in Recife shows the excessive burden of rent in the city of Recife, composing a relevant participation in the total of our housing deficit. So it is something that possibly because of the low amount of available land, because these popular areas house a population that is very close to the labor market, which is well inserted in the cities, the prices practiced in these locations are very high. And perhaps this explains how this excessive rent burden has this participation in our city. And then the goal of my presentation is to characterize two simultaneous initiatives for the elaboration of social housing public policies that happen within the local government of Recife, highlighting that social housing is not a consensus because within the government of the state, the program that is currently being promoted is the ownership program, the Morar Bem program. So we have Bom de Moral, which is social rent, but we also have Morar Bem. So how is it that the social rent is gaining space in the city of Recife? And just to remind what was already said, I'd like to say that we have the Bom de Morar program with beneficiaries that are selected from public calls. They need to reside in Recife for at least 2 years and be members of the single registry Cadê Único. We have an amount, a voucher amount, that according to the decree may reach R1,000, and that the beneficiaries themselves may appoint their preferred pieces of real estate to compose the public real estate bank. And we can also have public calls for landowners, both private and legal persons and associations can submit their real pieces of real estate for analysis to compose this public park. And it's a program that I didn't even know that the operator of this program had already been hired in the meantime in this last month. So that's a piece of news that I just found out. And there are several decrees that compose this legal framework and that contribute for us to understand how it works. In fact, it's not operational yet. And the other program, which is the social rent PPP, it's the first time that we see written in the municipal legal framework that housing is a service. So it has been instituted in a very solid manner, social housing as a service, and we understand that this is not a recent idea. So if we were to remember in the National Congress of Architects in 1945, we had a thesis that housing should be considered a public utility service, that the IDB in 2013 and 2014 hired a consultancy where many countries in Latin America researched the potential and the reach and the possibilities that social rent could present. And in the final document, in the summary, there is basically a very well instituted defense of housing as a service by the IDB. So, who are the formulators of these policies and where do these ideas start? And this causes me to think what happened in 2020 for that idea to be considered so urgent and so innovative, and if it's something that we have been debating and negating in Brazil ever since 1940, why is it that in 2020 this is such an innovative idea? So I think we need to always be thinking about that.
And here, oops, here we see that there are two buildings in this social rental that are dedicated to alienation. And we must highlight that when we talk about the Siqueira Campus building, this is a very well located plot that it belongs to the municipality, and it will be alienated at popular market prices. And we see that these are all official figures, and they will be sold up from 264,000 to 350,000 reais in units of 1 and 2 rooms. These are very high prices. And this is a public lot that will be operated in a public-private partnership and that will be alienated. And they will belong to people with a payment capacity compatible to the to ranges 1 and 2 from the Minha Casa Minha Vida federal program. So this price is higher than that used in used properties in the central part of Recife. So it's a market operation that will alienate properties at high prices by square meter and by unit. The same thing happens in the Cabanga neighborhood, where we have one of the largest sanitation facilities, and we have this plot that was donated, and where these apartments will be alienated by the private initiative by a very high and relevant value. So it is a PPP to live in the center of town, but maybe it's not a social rent partnership. Another issue of this PPP is the proportion of units that are realized in new constructions. Only 21% will be rehabilitated units, and 79% will be new construction. And we have several mappings that reveal the large amount of properties that are subused or subutilized and empty. So here you can see that we have this area when we have buildings that are completely unoccupied or at least half occupied. Here we have another part of the city with abandoned buildings, which could be collected in the project. Here in this map, we have the real estate that could be requalified. And here the black dots are real estate that are owing over R$ 500,000 in municipal taxes, building taxes. So when we have the PPP Morar no Centro that dedicated to building new housing and not managing the stock, that we are missing an opportunity to act in an exemplary way in rehabilitating buildings, because we have been attracting investment recently, but this investment has not been directed to housing projects, and yes, but for building new verticalized projects. So when we see this building, which is a building that will be alienated, that is going to be sold in the 1 and 2 ranges of the Minha Casa Minha Vida program. And when we look at these new constructions, we have typologies that are very similar to those of all neighborhoods in the city. So what is the contextualization when you consider the neighboring areas? Why should we build new housing and make new construction works when we have such a high stock of idle buildings and unoccupied buildings that we can use? So we also highlight that the income, that the revenue comes from the payment of residential rents and also by the complementation by the public powers, and also the exploration of marketable real estate and services, and the concessionary will explore these rents as well. When we see the typology that is offered for 3 rooms in total, there are only 31 units, and there's a predominance of the offer in gray here in this graph of 2-room units. So the predominance is effectively in the offer of 2-room units. And as my final remarks, we say that we have this perspective for social rental, that considering that we have a total deficit of 53,967 housing units, of which 46,150 have excessive burden with rent. We have the predominance of new buildings and constructions in the PPP Morar no Centro. We're destining estimating public buildings with in the market of more than 5,000 reais by square meter, which is a higher value than the market. So they are very, very expensive buildings and will be sold. And it's not clear how this schedule, this implementation schedule will be done and which are the dates of implementation. How long will it last? If it's a temporary rental, or if it's a transitory demand, or is it a permanent demand? What is the financial sustainability of this policy of Bom de Morar, in addition to the IDB resources? Because this program was created after an extreme climate event, which were the rainfalls of May and June 2022. And in September, we saw this collection of resources in this partnership between the municipality of Recife and the IDB. And we must think, what is the financial sustainability of this project in addition to the IDB resources? Does it fall within the financial frameworks of the municipality or not? So from the quantitative point of view, we have a guarantee of 637 housing units for social rental in this Morar no Centro program, with an expectation of 1,200, or this is our target for the project for the next years. And we need to know that while we're living this exception moment for the program, we must understand that this is a moment to mature the debate and to deepen our reflections. So I would like to thank you very much for your these are our contacts and institutional contacts. If you would like to contact us and learn a little bit more, we are available. Thank you very much. Thank you. We have very specific issues, but others that are more general and common to all the projects presented. So we're going to work on the dimension of the São Paulo metropolitan area, and here we've seen also Recife and Campo Grande. And now we'll talk about public innovation and financial inclusion from the Bolsa Aluguel programs to credit risk coverage solutions for low-income families. I welcome our panelists. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen.
Bom, eu vou botar aqui o cronômetro para cuidar o tempo. Eu sou Amanda.
I am Amanda. I am a research assistant. I'm here with FGV Cidades. I'm here with Claudia, our partner, and we will present our model proposal that we've been developing in our research work. Amanda, please, can you put it full screen, please? And now we see your screen, but it's not full screen mode. Please, no.
Eu vou compartilhar.
Eu ia sugerir para você parar de compartilhar e tentar compartilhar de vez.
Please just stop sharing and maybe share again, and maybe that will work.
Pronto, ótimo.
There you go.
Agora foi. Mas tem algum problema ainda?
Não, agora tá.
Tá bom.
Yeah.
Tá certo.
Now it's good.
Bom, então hoje a gente vai apresentar.
We're going to present this the model we've been developing about housing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the context that we based our research on. and then Claudia will continue with the model itself. The model is based on what we've been observing today in the housing market, the changes and shifts in the housing regarding the growth of the population that is living with rent from 2016 to 2022. There was a growth of 8 million people that rent, and this is seen in all social extracts, especially among Black people and poor people. And as we've seen in other works, there's been an increase in the housing deficit that arises from the excessive burden in the rental market.
Alô, Iana? Aí.
Bom, pensando nesse contexto do mercado.
So when we think about this context of the housing markets, our proposal is based on the private real estate. When we look at the dynamics of the rental market, we have financial and economic barriers for the low-income families. So when you're
dificuldade em cumprir as garantias que são requisitadas pela lei do inquilinato para fazer uma contratação formal do aluguel, além de mitos sobre os níveis de inadimplência nas classes populares que empurram esse público, esses grupos para o mercado informal de aluguel.
Push these people to the informal rental market, which is a place where these people can satisfy their needs, even if precariously, but also has barriers like the information barriers, the rental markets and the studies that we've assessed. We've seen that they're very dynamic with specific negotiation dynamics in which the real estate agents are in existence, and we see a precarious circulation of information in these informal markets in which the people get informed themselves, educate themselves from the neighbors, friends, and family. So the circulation of information of the offer is very precarious, and that leads to informal contracts, many times that are not written down without any guarantees, and they tend to put the tenant in a very vulnerable situation. So briefly, I would like to mention the social rental projects and to tell you where we stand at the moment. Usually the social rental programs are financed transfers, and the destination of these resources is free. Usually it's done through a voucher, and through these transfers, the family may use this value as they wish. The standard or the medium value in the Habitacionais is 550 reais, and we can assume that with considering this value and considering the medium value of rentals, we can assume that the beneficiary has to complement this amount with their salaries. And the location of these houses and the contract relationships are precarious, and they are emergency. It's an emergency aid, although it's been in existence for over 2 decades, and there's low evaluation and low monitoring. In general, we have 2 types of social rental programs. Our proposal is more related to this first situation, the events or adverse situations that affect housing, for which the concession of the benefit is motivated by a risk or an imminent risk of disaster or government intervention. The second model is situation related to the person's vulnerability. It's a situation in which access to housing is understood as a condition for the person to be able to overcome this vulnerability. For example, domestic violence situations or child labor or homelessness. Now I'll pass the floor to Claudia. Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you for inviting us and for such a rich debate and learning. I will present based on what Amanda spoke about. We'll show you our modeling project, which we've been developing in FGV Cidade, which we call the inclusive social rent, in the ASI in the Portuguese acronym. Our model seeks, and I would like you to please look at the first little house and then the others. As Amanda mentioned, we know that today any low-income person is subjected to very high asymmetries in information-wise. So it's very hard for them to know where there's a housing offer. They're not that auto-reference from their own neighborhood or the precarious settlement where they live. That does not mean that the city does not have other possible offers and that may be accessible, affordable for them, because many low and medium income families who are not so vulnerable, they pay very high rents proportionally to the services and the location and opportunities that they find there. But people are kind of stuck with those barriers of information. So what our model seeks, first of all, is to improve and to overcome that barrier, to reduce those asymmetries, bringing tools that the market already offers, like in the formal rental market. We know that nowadays not everybody walks among the neighborhoods looking for real estate. They usually do it online, but those low-income families are not on those platforms. So we are calling for the private sector through the aggregation of properties, which will be associated to real estate agencies that serve the population of low income, and to make the match and bring together the owner and the tenant, and to bring digital inclusion for the beneficiary of the rental aid that is outside of this digital world. And the second component is the financial inclusion, which was already mentioned in other presentations, even in the morning. We know that the low-income population and even the medium income class does not have financial access to rent some property like the higher classes, and that is, we have a low offer that adapt to the profile of these families.
So we want to bring solutions in the private market through social fintechs that already exist in the market, so that they can give that risk coverage that a low-income beneficiary in the informal market would need to have access to a formal rent contract, a contract with better conditions. Through these two elements, financial inclusion and digital inclusion, we hope that the beneficiaries of this type of program increase their freedom and their options of choice, which was very clear in the cases of Campo Grande and Recife. People want to be better located, but they don't have access to that better location, and it's not just an economic or income matter. Amanda, you can move on to the next slide.
No?
I don't. Oh, now I see. I see the slide. So this is an image of the financial contractual flow of this inclusive social rent model I want to propose to you, because we would need a little bit more time to explain in detail this flow. but it illustrates the logic with which the model would work with the new actors. So we're usually used to only seeing the municipal government and the beneficiary in a direct relationship where we have this rental aid. And we can bring other actors like the federal government or perhaps the state government, bringing funds that help reduce the cost of the financial risk coverage, which nowadays for a fintech is very expensive for a fintech to go out into the market and take out loans in the private markets to provide financial services for the population of lower income. Putting together what the government can add as a benefit or as a subsidy for the beneficiary and what often the beneficiary brings in because we know that they bring in their own property or their own guarantees, this value goes over to the fintech that manages the risk, and that fintech will have the mission of issuing the payments or doing what we call the financial management of the rental contract. And on the other hand, you will have the real estate aggregator that will be linked to leasers and real estate agencies, and that will make this bridge between the beneficiaries and the landowners and real estate agencies, and that will coordinate with this other side, which is the offer. We know that the landowner and tenant relationships are conflicting and they need interventions. So what we are proposing here is the participation of two private actors to reduce informational and financial access to credit obstacles, because we know that a rent contract is different from a contract where you are offering credit to the tenant. Next one. Some advantages, and coming to the end here, the main advantage that we want to emphasize for that model is the possibility of social mobility, so that people can live in better places. The bringing down of these obstacles and the use of access to data for public management to structure monitoring and evaluation plans. Some of the challenges, and we wouldn't have time to explain this in detail, but several of them have appeared in the seminar before. So this model has challenges for the government, like the public contracting of innovation, especially when innovation comes from the private sector. From the beneficiary standpoint, how can you include the most vulnerable bracket? Because typically they're left out of housing policies and the need for technical work and social assistance, because we think that housing is a social policy that needs other services, especially for certain groups. And from the private standpoint, especially in the case of Campo Grande, they mentioned this, the risk of the creation of cartels, which is a real risk, and the capture of public resources, for example, with increased prices that are agreed, or even if they're not agreed, but based on the offer of a public program, also the risk for discrimination and an appropriate system of incentives and remuneration for the private sector. So finally, we need the balance between a market solution and the possibility that this solution anchored in the private stock is already existent, but it needs to become affordable for the families. And the understanding of that model as a lab in a public policy tradition that is guided basically for the production of housing and ownership. And we want to thank FGV, especially the network of research, FAPESP, that supports this project, and the ABC Consortium that has allowed us to know the public management and the daily basis of rental programs. If you want to follow us in the social networks, here are the other authors as well, especially Fernanda, Maria Clara, and Amanda. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Claudia and Amanda. I will now call to debate with all of you Professor Luciana Almeida from FAU-USP. I have previously introduced her, and she needs no introduction as well. She's an expert on the topic, on the management of public policies, especially housing policies. So you have the floor. You have about 12 minutes to pose your provoking questions for debate, and I will ask you to ask everybody questions. And another one is a message for the public. You can add questions on the chat, on the YouTube chat, first to bring into the debate. After Luciana proposes the debate, we will evaluate if we're going to have a single round of answers or if I will add the questions in the chat so that people can have time to answer. Okay? Okay. Thank you very much, Carol, for your introduction. Very kind. I'd like to say hello to everybody. I think we didn't have any men in this session in this afternoon, from what I remember. So I would like to say hello to my fellow women. Very interesting research, very interesting proposals. And I think this helps us understand the huge challenges in the management of rent. Paula is here remembering Victor, part of the Recife team. Thank you, Paula. You're absolutely right. Well, actually, I tried based on what is written in the records and now in the presentations. Also try to look at the experiences, but I think I won't escape the need of working with specific issues in each presentation. So I think this may help us understand. And in that sense, I will start with the specific issues and I will finalize with a more general dimension of what has been happening from what I realized when reading the research. And in the case of São Paulo, which started us off, I think it would be important to first talk about the challenges. When they were going to talk about the challenges, I think they ran out of time, and it would be important to hear from them about the challenges. But in reading the issues and in reading what was written in the records and in the presentation, it's very clear to me that there is a different perspective by SEAB when it comes to the enterprises in the social rent programs. And in the record, they say these are 5 enterprises, and in presentation, we have 7, and even in the presentation, they present Olarias and Parque do Gado as differentiated based on demand. And what is the demand that constitutes Parque do Gado, Olarias, and the demand that goes over to other enterprises? We know the difference in demand, we know the challenges that are set here, but I believe that part of the challenges they have come across are related to this specific point and this specific discussion. But what I wanted to say about São Paulo's experience actually is something that was not presented here, and it's also not in the records, but it is my experience as a council person in the municipal council, which is a disconnect between the social work done by SEAB with all of the dimensions that they have presented and the condominium management, which is up to COAB and the municipal housing fund. The role of COAB in the management of the fund, this group of condominium management seems to suffer from this disconnect between the work being done in the Secretariat, the management being done at Coab, a discussion, and I remember this from several meetings in the council and in the fund and in the executive part of the fund, that this was a problem. There's a disconnect in the physical aspect of the enterprises and in the management of water and energy and the social work as well. This was a very hard triangulation to be done, and this was always a fundamental discussion for us to think about. The management of rent. We have few social rental enterprises as social rental programs in Brazil. I think the experience, looking at the experience, the effective experience of the day-to-day implementation of these enterprises is fundamental for us to move forward in the models that are being proposed. So to dissect these challenges and these problems and the implementation of the management and the trajectory, and I think is the fundamental. So this should be a research agenda, especially for the public resource research that you're doing with the Secretariat, and dissecting this is fundamental. When Claudia Eloy and Luana Vanucci presented the Campo Grande experience, I have a huge surprise here, at least to me, when it comes to the centrality of the social rental program, which is a criterial perspective on demand, looking at the composition of the income, of the family income based on per capita income. And I think that this is, it doesn't give a direction to the market, a direction of the ceiling or of the floor that we have seen before, since this generates a huge difficulty because it modulates the market response. And when I'm talking about the per capita income for the family, I don't have a ceiling or a floor. I am starting from the family, the effective demand and the needs for that family, creating this efficiency in the allocation of the subsidy. And I think this is very interesting and very relevant, and that we should deal with that very attentively. And I really think it's very important to look at it like that. But I have an issue that I think both you, Claudia, and Luanda bring to the presentation, and that I would like to hear from you today or perhaps at another point. You eventually said that the family needs to have a minimum income to join this program. They can't, they need to have a minimum income. At the same time, if the family cannot pay, and that's why it would not be electable for a financing program, it can join a program, but it has to have a bare minimum income. And what would be the interval between that minimum income and the minimum income for the acquisition of real estate? So you're focusing the program on this specific niche. There is that demand, specifically in Campo Grande. So the other programs are income transfer programs. These are programs that are looking to another audience. We have a program for rental that you did this modeling for, and we also have an house acquisition program. So I wanted to hear from you. Is that it? What is that demand? And it had been identified by the municipality previously or not, remembering that for the model program, the payment ability tends to exist, so that the state or the municipality can come in as the guarantor or the supervisor of the real estate, and this appears in both models. What is the role of the municipality and the state in supervising and identifying, classifying, and maintaining the real estate? How is that information, how is that relationship with the real estate? We didn't really go into that. And Iana gave a presentation that really helps me in wondering or asking questions about the PPP in Recife and the rental program in Recife. And I have a few questions about the program. I didn't really understand exactly how the program works. What is the design? Because only in the beginning of the Recife PPP uses public resources, but the 25% of the local income going to the design. What are the landmarks actually that make this net income moves away from the PPP design? And this is not very clear. And at what stage is it? What families will be benefited or that are being benefited, and the role in the records, the role of the manager is highlighted, but how does that happen? This manager is said in the article that they are the one who will select the families, and can this maybe not cause a problem since it's the manager themselves that will be connected to it and that they will be paid for the service? Iana reminded me not exactly about what she said, but in 1 minute I will conclude. But her presentation reminded me actually because she draws a comparison between the state government program and the program by the Recife municipality. And this reminded me of something very relevant that came up, and the impacts of the absence of a regulation on the role of the federated entities when it comes to housing. Let us imagine that if in the public health system, the state also built health units or provided primary health care. So primary health care, if both the state and municipality offer it, they would compete for the service. So what is the message that the real estate market will understand if I don't have a clear regulation of the entities? Who will be the one to provide high complexity treatment? Who will be the one to provide primary health care? Who will be the one to promote rental, social rental? Who will build the buildings? Because if I have all federated entities doing this at the same time, perhaps different messages are being sent to the market, and this impacts the discussion on pricing of the square meter or of the property itself. And housing as a service is relevant, in fact, but we need to be careful because perhaps housing as a service can be an entryway for us to capture the net income throughout the years, because the flow of payment is fundamental for us to insert housing into the financial flows.
And in relation to Claudia's final presentation, it was very interesting to understand. I believe they are necessary macroeconomic improvements. It is very necessary to the housing market. Our market is very irregular and very complex on a national level in terms of design. Claudia knows this very well because she's from the law sector. And we have to understand the impact of these initiatives at the same time is very important for us to understand, so that we do not throw everything into or to consider the asymmetries as an absence of the guarantee or of a service as something inherent to the to the informal market. I would like to discuss this a little further because I believe that there are microeconomic improvements that are essential, but to think the informal requires from us, the planners, the urban planners, the sociologists, that we know better this informal market. I believe we have very few information, very little information about this, and you brought much information, but this is a discussion that we must think about and why are we using public resources for this social housing, but we also must think about the maintenance of these properties and how this would work. In general, this is what I understand. Carol began talking about the importance of this view towards housing policies, but the truth is that we have very little knowledge because we have very few experiences about this. So to understand the premises and how to operate, if it's in the central area, and the importance of combining this with the urban instruments is something we already know. But discussion here is about implementation. How do we implement this, and can we make this implementation be an effective overcoming of vulnerabilities? So we had a few tips that we've seen here in the presentation, but we must advance in knowing and learning about this informal market, how it operates, and effectively consider and the impacts of the different policies have in the real estate market, and how can we react? It's a research on offer and supply and demand at the same time. I hope I was able to contribute in this such an interesting discussion. I would like to congratulate everyone here. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if you'll have time to discuss so many topics, but this is a project that intends to have other meetings and other seminars to continue this debate. But I would like to have at least 3 minutes for each project and case study to answer a few questions. And I would like to direct the chat questions. And please, I would ask you to please write them down because they are directed to each project. And because they also complement some of Luciana Roy's notes. For example, I will start backwards, specifically on the case. We have a few other questions. I have to find the one I had pinned. In the case of the presentation by Cláudia Costa, we have several questions. For example, from Ana Cristina Moraes, what are the advantages that the owner in particular for him to enter the project that you propose? She is relating diagnostics and an assessment about the real demands and needs of the low-income population in large cities. And I think this is what Claudia said. We need to know and learn more about this market. I know you have your project has this other part, and we need more time to deepen this issue, but this is what she wants to know. And Marina Santos, in relation to the case of Belo Horizonte, and also Fabiano Araújo is asking about this. They are comparing the similarities between the case of Belo Horizonte with the Campo Grande case. And they ask, do you have the contacts? Is there a contact or relationship between these cases? And I would like to ask because it is important to recognize if there is or if there was at any time a formulation process, any contact between these cases that are being presented. Did you or have already exchanged experiences before, and we will be able to organize other fora for this, because there are some guidelines that go beyond the specific cases, but to which extent has the federal government designed guidelines and the impact of the cases? So we must recognize this circulation of ideas and this exchange of information among these cases. We have other two questions, one from Isabela Guerreiro for the Recife case. I would like to know if the possibility of securitization of receivables is predicted through the vouchers for the beneficiaries or by the PPP, by the concessionary.
E aí, né, a Paula Santoro também adiciona
Paula
uma pergunta para
Santoro
Recife, a
has
respeito
also a
dos outros
question
programas que
for
estão
Recife in relation to the
articulados
other
a esses dois
cases that are
programas centrais,
articulated
né, que
to
seria
the
sempre
two
importante
cases that were presented here.
esse panorama, tá? E aí, deixa eu só pescar mais uma
Now,
pergunta,
just look,
Nath
Nati Lelis has a
Leles, né, sobre
question
como é o funcionamento,
about how is the
a pessoa
operation
mexe aqui como é o funcionamento da PPP, que envolve
of
a
the
alienação de
PPP
imóveis. Quais os
involving
papéis,
the real estate and properties, the documentation, responsibilities, or the roles of each actor.
Vale a pena talvez indicar algumas
And
referências,
maybe it
tá?
is interesting to indicate some references to aid further research.
Gente, acho que chega, senão a gente não
I
consegue
think
ter
it's
3 minutos
enough.
para cada qual.
Otherwise, 3 minutes will not be enough.
Debate.
I think we had a very rich debate. Okay, so now let's allow 3 minutes for each case. So let's do Cláudia first, and then
Você quer começar? Não, Denise quer começar porque ela
Denise wants to begin, I guess,
querendo justamente apresentar uma
because
parte
she
da
wanted
Vamos começar de frente para
to
trás,
present.
então.
Okay,
Vai,
so let's
Denise,
start with
você,
Denise.
por favor, com a palavra.
Obrigada, Carol.
Thank you, Carol.
Queria primeiro agradecer a
First of all,
oportunidade
we would like
Luciana,
to thank
né?
Luciana for her
E o que se refere
contributions. And in relation
nós só citarmos 5 empreendimentos de
to
locação e
the,
hoje na apresentação nós
the expanded area, we'd like to talk about. Do you hear us? Yeah, I think there's some kind of connection issue, but we're back. So in the presentation, we talked about the Olaria neighborhood, in which there is a resolution of April this year, in which the Gato and the Larias are included in the social rental, but the resolution also says that we need a legal opinion for it to be implemented. We thought that by this time they would have been published, but it wasn't. And these two projects face several challenges, but this is not what we want to talk about. Also, the monitoring was lost. At the time, the kind of service that was provided to these families did not have an established rule. Of course, the Gato community is served very differently than what we're doing currently. So there was this very great difficulty regarding monitoring and following these families. Today, we've lost all this work that was done. These are two developments that the team is not able to access. They are closed territories to our social team for several issues. Public security is one of them, and because we do not have the original demand anymore, and so for several reasons, we're not able to access and to enter those developments anymore. And that is why it was decoupled. About the co-op and SEAB, The only thing I can say is that we agree with you. That is exactly what happens. Because our time is short, we will not be able to deepen the issue, but it is a great challenge. And we only reinforce what you said, so we are able to approach the other topics. But it's really a defined situation. We have sort of different operating lines, and that impacts our work, and we really feel it.
E referente ao que a professora Paula comentou
In
também,
relation to about to the difficulties, for example, the fragility in following up. Sometimes there's a difficulty in policies to understand and assume the responsibility for those families. So in the activities, there's this in the activities, it's difficult for all these other services to be involved and to assume responsibility. For SEAP, for example, brought these people. SEAP brought the development, so now they're responsible for everything. And we know that the housing policies does not serve and does not include all other needs and policies. We need the other departments working together with the housing department in order to really serve in a comprehensive way. Also, we feel that when we talk about social rental, because these are public developments. Other the environments in which we work with doing social work, after some time, families own the property. But when we talk about social rental, we have these families that were brought by SEAB. They usually, we have to keep calling them because nobody wants to be responsible for that. Also, about the list. This is one of the most discussed topics, and we've been working with it directly. I spoke about the demand that we have, the open and the closed demand that we have. Those were removed from our public areas in order to enable urban projects and risk mitigation works and environmental recovery. And we also have the spontaneous demands. The demand by SEAP does not accept social rentals. So there's some kind of rejection to the program. We worked with the Vila dos Idosos, for example, and from 285 people, elderly people that were consulted to see if they wanted to live in this social rental, only one person accepted. So they want something definite. So this transitory aspect makes the closed demand reject the service through the social rental. This is our experience. They want a definitive service because it had already a property, let's say, something like that. And that's the problem. So they want something more permanent. And so we're always seeking to articulate with other sectors so that we can receive this demand from other departments like the human rights and health, because they also work with the homeless population and the elderly people, people in violent situations, so they would be able to contribute to in indicating this demand to the housing department. So we still face this kind of conflict. We're building tools to articulate and make the legislation to receive this demand and for it to be serviced in our social rental tools. Thank you for the time. Claudia, Luanda, please choose one of you to answer. I will begin and then I'll pass the floor to Luanda for her to complement my talk. I would first like to address the issue of of design. It was a niche design that we created for Campo Grande. And for those who are not familiarized with Campo Grande, the city has the Bolsa Aluguel for emergency services. They are also developing the public park for the elderly. Just like Recife, we are also developing a PPP. And the fourth modeling, which was the one Luanda and myself worked on, was the voucher model based on from a specific revenue from Coab, the municipal Coab. If you ask me if there is demand, I can answer that yes, we do, because you have families that do not pass the filter. For example, the informal income does not pass the filter. Even when they do have income, we have many informal workers. So it's not they do not have the payment capacity. They do not have the condition to qualify for credit. Because in addition to the payment capacity, you have to have other indicators. You must not have any debt, and you have to have some reserves. So there is this niche. And the Campo Grande, when we opened the call, we received over 5,000 applications. So it's a niche program, but that doesn't mean that it's enough. No, we need to have projects and service for each segment. And when you work with in per capita income, we make the difference to be able to assess the payment capacity of the family. When we say, oh, I serve up to 3 minimum wages, that is a lot of people and much diversity in each situation. If you have a woman with 4 children and who earns 1 minimum salary, and you have a couple that earns 3 minimum salaries, that's very different social situations. And when you see the affordability indicators is 30% or 25% of income, these indicators are interesting for you to monitor the market and for you to analyze how decoupled the price is of the income. But it also leads to errors because you do not know what is the effective situation of each person. Like the financial agent knows when they're going to give the credit because they assess the income flow of the family, and they assess how much the family can pay. And when we talk about rental, it cannot be different, because when we base our rental program on income, because I can also have a very subsidized project, but if we're building a program to continue to exist depends on payment, and we insert families that do not have payment capability, we are condemning the project to die soon. And there's the example of Minha Casa Minha Vida in the first range, in which this happens, although it's not a rental program. We have coordinated a study on that, in which we had 3 pilot case studies. One was in Bahia, which had families that when entering the project, when accessing housing, they were already below the poverty line. So, and when in that situation, they cannot even eat. So how can they compromise their income to pay rent and the condominium, water, power, energy? There's no way.
So I think that the rationale was around that. And then you ask the role of the municipalities. And I wouldn't say, well, it's a supervision and inspection role, but it's not a maintenance role, because in this case, since the park is private, the maintenance of the units is done by the private sector. And the municipality does social monitoring, and they have social monitoring, which is very careful. And it has happened with 3 families that they took that family to the completely subsidy modality because the family had lost income. So this role is maintained, but not as a maintenance role for the unit. And Paula also asked about the land market and everything. Well, Campo Grande has a low density, so you can't compare it to Recife or to São Paulo, but that doesn't mean that the same type of program cannot be applied in other contexts. Did I leave time left for Luanda? No, actually not. We're running very late. Luana, can you complement with anything? Oh, no, it's okay. I was going to talk about Belo Horizonte, but yes, we had dialogue with their program there, with managers from the program, but I think we can continue so that everyone else can speak. Thank you. Thank you. Maria Eduarda, please.
Vou tentar resumir tudo em 3
Well,
minutos.
I'll try to summarize everything in 3 minutes, but
Trazer contexto
I think that
muitos de nós
bringing a
acreditamos que
context,
locação social não é uma
which is
bala de
many
prata
of
que vai
us
resolver
believe
todo o
that
déficit habitacional.
social housing is
Ela
not
é
a
parte da
silver
solução.
bullet
A
that
gente
will
sempre
solve
entendeu que ela é
all
mais uma
the
solução
entirety of the
habitacional.
housing problem.
E
So it's an
concordo muito quando
additional
Cláudia fala que tem
housing
famílias que não
solution.
têm
And I really agree when Claudia says that there are families that cannot pay for, that cannot deal with any co-payment, and they can only be inserted in 100% subsidy program. So when we created the social housing program, we also created the social housing law and the social assistance law, which is a law for vulnerable families associated to the human rights and social assistance sectors. So we did that work to see which public is able to pay and which is not. And we are also developing a housing program with social rent, especially for the elderly, in parallel, and also development of houses and the Housing First program. So this is specifically for the public that is in a street situation or in more complex situations. And about Luciana's question, specifically about the PPP, and about the net revenue, I didn't mean that we are going to use 5% of the net revenue of the city, but according to the PPP law, we can use up to 5%, but our program will not reach even half of that on a yearly basis, but it was a source of resources that we had. It's a program that we started creating in 2021, in a year when we were working with the PPA of a previous administration, and our ability to invest was very low in a year that was a year of contingency, so that we could take out a loan in the following year to develop several integrated urbanization policies, for example. So the PPP is going to last for 25 years, and in the timeline, in 2021, the contract was signed to begin studies with the federal government. In 2022, Caixa hired a consortium to develop the study, and we knew from the outset that a PPP could not be elaborated in a year and a half. We know that it takes time, but we really believe in it because it's a 25-year contract. So guaranteeing that those 600 units would be in the public part, and in the end date of the concession, the construction will be in the same quality as day one. So this is very important for us. And also what we bring in this timeline is that this year in 2024, the social rent PPP for Recife is going through a period of analysis by the Court of Accounts in the state. So this gives institutional security to the PPP, and all PPPs go through that, but we believe that it's worth it. And also about the access, so we bring in the PPP housing, but also urban requalification, the importance of historic heritage, and the combat to urban empty spaces, because this is the worst thing that we can have in a city. And when the real estate is public and it doesn't fulfill a social role, we need to turn it into something that does. So that's what we did. All real estate properties, the exception of one, are public properties, and they were donated specifically to be a part of the PPP, so we cannot destine it to anything else other than that. And about the security of the receivables, the vouchers paid by the local government with municipal resources, with resources of low operations. The IDB will only pay the manager fees. All vouchers will be paid with the own resources of the local government, and these are resources guaranteed in our pluriannual plan. So it's guaranteed for the next year and the following years. It is a program that was structured through a decree to be the basis of a housing policy, and there's no time limit for the families to spend in the program. If the family is in need and they meet the criteria that to prove that they are still in the economic and social situation where they need to be in the program, they may stay in the program for many years. And I think it's important to say that. Could you please conclude? Okay, I'll conclude. And first of all, the private partner that is chosen and that wins the bid, they need to create a special purpose society, and they will receive the monthly installments, and they'll probably take out loans to build the units. And I will leave you with the website if you want to go deeper into that, partnerships.recife.pe.gov.br, and the study of the PPP will be very well detailed. And we did have contact with other municipalities. In 2021, we talked to Belo Horizonte, we visited São Paulo 2 times over, and we visited other housing enterprises. Also in Campo Grande, Laura was also one of our consultants in our program. So thank you. Thank you, Maria Eduarda. Yana? Guys, I would like to thank you for the questions. This is a moment of much learning for me. A question that was asked directly for me is how does the alienation of real estate works in the PPP, and all of the access to information that we have is through public vehicles, through documents that are public and that are disseminated by decrees, by law. So in my role as the university, we put ourselves in the role of investigating and trying to understand. We have access only to a fraction of that information, right? So there is not in any of the documents available. So I accessed what was in public consultation and what was in the partnerships.ppp website. And the alienation of real estate may be the first construction site or the last. So we don't have any information of the period, the disposal of the real estate. We don't know what will be the first construction that will happen in this PPP, because if these are the fundamental works to compose the resources and make the rest of the PPP viable, perhaps the two pieces of real estate that will be disposed of will be the two first ones to be built. And if it's an operation that is not effectively in the real estate market, how will be the selection of the people who will be able to acquire the real estate properties in the case of the ones that will be disposed of? So these are questions that we still have, because that is information that is still not available in the official documents. There is the commitment the commitment of a specific sequence of real estate that will be happening for social rental, or will the ones that will be alienated, the ones or disposed of, the ones that will be built first? We don't have access to that information, and we also don't have access to information that explain why is it that in 2020, where so many local governments took up social housing programs, this was a landmark when many local governments understood that the time came to invest in social rent. Is it perhaps the last stage of dispossession especially in public housing policies, are we now finding a public that won't be able to own our houses, that they will have as their sustainable measure to solve their housing policy, social rent policy, and the rejection of the social rent program also seems to happen in Recife. So the movements, the housing movements, when they are present in the same discussions and in public debates, then members of the Housing Secretariat here in Recife, they say that they don't want it. So we had an event that was held in November last year where we had a representative from an occupation and a representative of the Housing Secretariat, and the representative of that occupation, that settlement, said that they don't want social rent. So that's actually a debate that is just starting to bubble up, and I would like to invite the academic community and everybody to always be attentive to understand why this is happening and for us to behave and to take on an investigative position to understand why these things are happening. Thank you, Yana. Claudia, please. Thank you, Carol. Well, it's always good to go last because I can organize the ideas better, but our time is up. So I wanted to say here on such a qualified panel that public policy should be debated, as said by Professor Luciana. Housing public policy should be seen first as a social policy, and this implies a change in mindset and according to the logic of incrementalism, because this is very important for this discussion. And I want to start with that to discuss what we already know and what we don't know, which is kind of the point we wanted to bring to our presentation. We wanted to bring what we already know and that we have learned from the social rent programs, and our model is more focused on the social rent programs for situations where houses are lost for any reason and not in terms of social assistance. And what do we know? We know, for example, that part of the beneficiaries is able to overcome the territorial exclusion barrier, perhaps 10 to 15%. And how is it that these beneficiaries, these small groups, is able to move from the worst locations, which is where they're at right now? Often in programs, they have been beneficiaries of for 15 years because we are working in an emergency logic program, but it's perhaps the more stable program in the last two decades in the country in terms of social housing. So some of them are able to do it, and this means that there are small inclusion windows or windows for the overcoming of segregation, and these windows are not necessarily in the offer and demand logic. When the government does a PPP to build houses, be it through the private sector or with public real estate, they are looking at offer and demand, but we are proposing a more dispersed model with dispersed beneficiaries and a dispersed offer. And my question is, who are these beneficiaries? Who are these owners? And would it be beneficial for them, a program like this one? It depends on who that owner is. And here I agree with Luciana. We know very little about popular housing markets. We know that they have their own rules. We know that they have a lot of contribution from illegal markets that are increasingly vertical, but we don't know a lot about these markets, and these markets are diffuse. So for a specific landowner, it may be interesting to be able to count on that payment. And then I go to the third question, which is what is the role of risk management companies? These companies offer an alternative, a different alternative, which is not bail insurance or the other option that we use in traditional rental contracts, because we know, as was mentioned by Maria Eduarda, we already know today that a specific portion of low-income population has the ability to pay, but does not have the ability to prove that they are able to maintain that payment throughout time in the molds that we have in traditional contracts. So we have social fintech companies that are wanting to enter this market, and they have the ability through AI and more appropriate criteria to say, look, Claudia has the ability of paying the monthly installment, and I can offer her a micro credit when she can't pay in January, which is the month when she pays school expenses. So we are imagining a proposal of opening other alternatives based on what we already know and the possibilities that innovation brings to the market. And lastly, I'd like to explain just a detail. In this incrementalism logic, we can think about these models from the demand, offer, and territories logic. We are very concerned about territories, and we can funnel this to specific territories. And in that sense, in addition to understanding the workings of the popular markets and the financial risk management structure, we also need to know about price curves and run curve analysis for popular markets, knowing that the housing market system is a system that is not really, it's very fluid. You can see where it ends and where the formal market begins. But we wanted to bring an idea, which is a public intervention that is more varied, expanding the options of public intervention, following the logic that all forms of fighting are necessary and valid because our housing demands are very broad. It's not just one or two subgroups. Thank you very much, everybody.
Agradeço muitíssimo, não
Thank you
só a
very
Cláudia,
much. Not only
alguns
Claudia,
recados finais
Amanda,
para
any
fazer o
final
encerramento.
comment? Otherwise, I have to
Agradecimentos a
conclude.
todos vocês.
Thank you,
Acho que foi ótimo o
everybody.
debate
And I
que
think it's been a
fizeram a gente
wonderful
refletir mais,
debate, and I'm
debater algumas
sure we will
perspectivas,
continue because there are many
ampliarmos esses debates em
perspectives, the
outros anos
future in this
que vêm.
debate in other forums next
Agradeço.
year. So thank you.
E
And
aproveito para
I
convidar
take advantage of this
para
moment to
o
invite you to
com a professora Raquel
the lecture with Professor
Políticas
Raquel Homiki,
habitacionais no contexto do aluguel como frente de
housing
expansão
practices
imobiliária
in the context
comercializada.
of rent.
Meia-noite, né? Daqui
And
a
it's
10
not
minutos.
actually in the evening, it's going to be in 10
10
minutes.
minutos de intervalo.
Okay, so a 10-minute
Entrar
break
aqui na
for
palestra
us to go into
realizada
Raquel's lecture that will be mediated by Isadora Guerreiro. So I invite you all to participate in this debate. Thank you, especially Luciana Hoyer as the debater here, and see you next time. Bye-bye.